able to see individual arias of his inserted into a number of productions. That was very common in those days, not to respect the original conception of a composer. As soon as you took an opera to another city, it was common to replace or remove entirely some of the music. And the way that he got his way in and starting to get experience with opera composition was by producing these little substitute arias. He had an extravagant admiration for the music of Mozart. And you often do hear shades of Mozart style in his work. Sometimes I want to sound the Mozart alarm when I'm in the audience. I'm just ridiculous at the opera. I honestly, frequently, I just want to leap out of my seat and say, "Did you hear that?" Then explain to everyone, you know, the subtlety of something. Usually and sometimes I want to do that when I hear Mozart, when it sounds, Mozart, it's Mozart. And I think one of the examples I would like from you shows how he did use Mozart's music as a resource. And they used to make fun of him for that because Germans in Italy, they were considered to be unfashionable, boorish, you know, rude, awkward people. So they teased him and they called him Il Tedeschino, the little German. And that was supposed to be derogatory. But his music enormously benefited from his acquaintance and love of the music of Mozart. But things started to happen to him very fast. At the age of 18, he received a commission from the Teatro Sandoise in Venice to compose La Cambiale di Matrimonio. And that was a one-act farsa. That just means a one-act comic opera, really a farce. And these early farces of his are charming. They're enchanting. They don't have the brilliance of the later works, of course they don't, but they're well worth listening to. And they're all recorded and should be heard. And he had a sort of an understudy break for this. He was hired as an emergency replacement after another composer reneged on a contract to compose the setting. Then there were other works for Venice and other Italian cities. And then his extraordinary ability to compose memorable opera overtures was also already in evidence besides his abilities as a composer of vocal music. And from this early period comes the beautiful overture to La Scala di Seta, the Silken Ladder, which in its original form was another one-act farsa. And that's his earliest overture that you still hear today. Then he achieved almost instantaneous international fame in the next period, 1813 to 1817, when he was in his early 20s. And, his motivation for writing all the operas that he did was mainly to support his family, which was common for singers as well, because they made so much money, they were expected to support parents, cousins, aunts, uncles, nieces, nephews, anyone who could possibly claim to be a dependent of yours was ready to cash in on your talent, and that did happen to Rossini. His first great success was a serious opera that is not commonly performed, and most audiences don't warm to it very much. That's Tancredi, written for Venice, and it included the vocal piece Di Tanti Palpiti, which was hummed all over Italy within a year. There was a famous incident in which there was a jury was assembled in one court case, and all the jurors at one point spontaneously, all of them, broke into Di Tanti Palpiti. They knew all the words and the music. Just an example of how Italians were considered to be naturally musical. Could you imagine any random jury in this country being able to sing any song? All the words and music memorized, no matter what it was. And then he also scored an astounding success with The Italian Girl in Algiers, no wonder. And with those two works, his place as the preeminent composer of opera in Italy was immediately established, and it led to commissions throughout the country of Italy. Then his most frequently performed opera of all, The Barber of Seville, was written for Rome in 1816. If you came to my lecture for that, I described the incredible mishaps that took place at the first performance. We don't have time for that because we have to talk about La Cenerentola, but that one came only a year later. And there was also The Thieving Magpie, La Cappellata, 1817. Then, let's see, Rossini centered himself in Naples for 6 years in the late 18 teens and early 1820s. And this was a period dominated by serious works. Only one of them is commonly performed today, La Donna del Lago, The Lady of the Lake, which they did produce here a few years ago. Beautiful production. Unforgettable singing, by the way. Semiramide, another popular one, was also composed at this time, but it was for Venice, not Naples. And the singers in Naples at this time demanded extremely florid vocal passage work in their arias, and Rossini consistently obliged them, almost to the point where the writing is so difficult. You imagine it really only existed in his imagination. It's so difficult, you can only say, nobody can really execute it perfectly, or there are only a very few people in history who ever could. But one who did very well was this woman, Isabella Colbran, who became his wife in 1822. Unfortunately, the marriage was always troubled and childless. But Rossini became very wealthy during this period, not only from his activities as a composer, but also from the gambling concession that he held at the Teatro San Carlo. That's what actually made him the big money. Because just as in the movie theaters that we go to see the HD broadcast, that they really make the money from the popcorn and and the smart people in theatrical production know that, and Rossini was one of them. And he had a special concession with this man, Domenico Barbaia, who was a great support to him both financially and artistically. And of course, the whole world at that time was watching what was going on with Italian opera, because it was the most prestigious opera by far. And so, because he was famous in Italy, he got invitations to go abroad. He did go to Vienna in 1822, and that was a particularly successful trip, which elicited the great envy of Ludwig van Beethoven, who was a jealous person. And they had a famous meeting where they could barely communicate with each other because they didn't really know each other's languages. But Beethoven, in a very patronizing way, advised him to stick to comic opera. Which was supposed to mean that his music didn't have enough depth for him to tackle the subtleties of serious opera. Beethoven's not the only one who said that. It's not fair, but that's not only that. Through the ages, that has not only been the opinion of Beethoven. Beethoven always felt he was unappreciated in the 1820s. There were always people who he was jealous of who were more popular, and Rossini was one of them. Yeah, he had a right to be jealous because, as I say, in 1822 it would be fair to describe him as the most popular composer in Europe for his delightful comic operas. Then the demand for Rossini's music led him to leave Italy entirely for the sake of enhanced professional opportunities. There was always big money in London. But they didn't like him there that much, partially because his wife's voice was in decline and they didn't like her singing very much. But he had a much better time in France, in Paris, where they had a special theater devoted exclusively to the production of Italian opera, the Théâtre Italien. And they loved him there. By the way, there was no Théâtre Français or Teatro Francese in Italy. The Italians were generally completely indifferent to what the French did. The Italians were secure in their superiority, and everything they did was imitated outside of Italy in this period. The French didn't think that was fair, but their audiences loved Italian music, so that's just what they had to deal with. This was how he looked about that time. I love because he looked so witty. We all want the composers to be nice people, and he was a very nice man. He was a warm, generous soul. So it always makes me happy to be able to report that. He did compose then for the Théâtre Italien and also for the Opéra. For the Opéra, you had to have works in French only. He learned to write operas in French for money. And prestige, and this did represent a shift in style away from the florid vocal embellishment of his early Italian works. They weren't so extravagantly ornamented anymore. The most famous work from this period is Rossini's last opera, William Tell. But it's not generally performed